The paradox of intelligence. Picture a quiet library in Oxford on a rainy afternoon. The kind of place where time seems to move differently. Among rows of ancient books, a solitary figure sits by the window, lost in thought. Not lonely, just alone. There's a difference, and that difference is what we're about to explore. Carl Rogers, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, spent decades studying human nature. And within his work lies a profound observation that challenges everything we assume about intelligence and social connection. Highly intelligent people often find themselves alone. Not by circumstance, but by necessity. This isn't about intelligence making you superior or isolated by arrogance. It's something far more subtle and deeply human. It's about how your mind works, what you need from conversations, and why the world around you sometimes feels like it's speaking a different language. If you've ever felt like you don't quite fit in, even in rooms full of people, if small talk feels exhausting rather than engaging, if you find yourself craving depth in a world that seems satisfied with surface-level interactions, this isn't a flaw. According to Rogers' insights into human psychology, it might be a natural consequence of how your intelligence shapes your experience of the world. Today, we're diving deep into the psychology behind this phenomenon. We'll explore why intelligent minds often walk a solitary path, what Carl Rogers discovered about authentic connection, and most importantly, how to navigate this reality without losing yourself in isolation or compromising who you are. But before we understand why intelligence creates distance, we need to understand what Carl Rogers taught us about human connection itself. Carl Rogers and the architecture of connection. Carl Rogers wasn't your typical psychologist. Born in 1902 in Oak Park, Illinois, he grew up in a strict, religious household where emotions were controlled and expressions of feeling were discouraged. This early environment taught him something crucial: when people can't be themselves, they suffer. He went on to revolutionize psychology with what he called person-centered therapy. But his real contribution went deeper. Rogers discovered that genuine human connection requires three essential elements: congruence, being authentic, unconditional positive regard, accepting someone without judgment, and empathic understanding, truly grasping another person's inner world. Here's where it gets interesting for our discussion. Rogers observed that most people interact on what he called surface levels, exchanges of pleasantries, social performances, carefully managed impressions. Think about your average conversation at a dinner party in London or Manchester. How's the weather? What do you do for work? Did you see the match last weekend? These interactions serve a social function, but they don't create real connection. Rogers noted that genuine connection requires vulnerability, depth, and the courage to drop the social mask. And this is where intelligent people encounter their first major obstacle. Highly intelligent individuals tend to see patterns others miss. They notice inconsistencies between what people say and what they mean. They pick up on subtext, underlying motivations, and hidden contradictions. This isn't arrogance, it's simply how their minds process information. Imagine attending a networking event in the City of London. While others engage in standard professional small talk, an intelligent person might notice the forced enthusiasm that doesn't reach people's eyes, the repetitive nature of conversations that follow predictable scripts, the way genuine questions are deflected in favor of rehearsed answers. Rogers would say this creates a fundamental mismatch. The intelligent person craves what Rogers called realness, authentic exchange, intellectual honesty, conversations that go somewhere meaningful. But most social environments are built on the opposite, maintaining comfortable surfaces, avoiding vulnerability, keeping things light. This isn't anyone's fault. Society needs these surface interactions to function smoothly. But for someone whose mind constantly seeks deeper patterns and authentic truth, these interactions feel hollow. Not wrong, just insufficient. And this insufficiency leads to the first reason intelligent people often find themselves alone: the exhaustion of translation. The exhaustion of translation. Let's talk about something most intelligent people recognize but rarely discuss: the constant mental translation required in everyday social interactions. Picture a typical Sunday afternoon at a pub in Cambridge. A group gathers, conversation flows about weekend plans, popular television shows, and local gossip. An intelligent person sits among them, participating, smiling, responding appropriately. But internally, there's a constant process of translation happening. They're not just hearing words, they're analyzing context, considering implications, connecting ideas to broader concepts, questioning assumptions, and simultaneously managing how to respond in a way that won't make others uncomfortable. It's like speaking a second language fluently but never quite thinking in it. Carl Rogers identified this phenomenon in his work on congruence, the alignment between inner experience and outer expression. He noted that when there's a constant gap between what you're experiencing internally and what you're expressing externally, it creates psychological tension. Over time, this tension becomes exhausting. Here's a concrete example. Someone says, "I'm thinking about starting a small business." Most people respond with encouragement, "That's great. Go for it." But an intelligent mind might immediately consider, what type of business? What's the market research? What about capitalization? What skills does this person have? Are they romanticizing entrepreneurship? What's their risk tolerance? These aren't pessimistic thoughts, they're just how our analytical mind processes information. But expressing all these considerations would be seen as discouraging or overthinking. So the intelligent person learns to translate their complex internal response into something socially acceptable. They say, "That sounds interesting. What kind of business?" But there's a disconnect, they're performing connection rather than experiencing it. Rogers observed that this performance, repeated thousands of times, creates what he called of incongruence, a split between the real self and the social self. An incongruence, according to Rogers, is psychologically draining. Now multiply this translation process across every casual conversation, every social gathering, every work meeting. The intelligent person isn't being fake, they're adapting. But adaptation requires energy. And when most interactions require this level of adaptation, social engagement becomes work rather than rest. This is why many intelligent people describe social events as exhausting rather than energizing. They're not antisocial, they're simply spending enormous cognitive resources managing the gap between their natural way of processing the world and the simplified way most social contexts require them to communicate. The result? Solitude becomes appealing not because they dislike people, but because it's the only place where they don't have to translate. In solitude, they can think at their natural pace, follow thoughts to their logical conclusions, and exist without the constant effort of making their internal world digestible for others. But the exhaustion of translation is just the beginning. There's another, deeper reason, the hunger for substance. The hunger for substance. There's a scene Carl Rogers described in one of his lectures that captures something essential. He spoke of a client who attended parties regularly, had many acquaintances, and by all external measures had an active social life. Yet she described feeling profoundly alone in crowds. When Rogers explored this with her, she revealed that she could spend an entire evening in conversation without discussing anything that actually mattered to her. The loneliness wasn't from lack of people, it was from lack of substance. This hunger for substance is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of intelligent solitude. It's not that intelligent people want to discuss quantum physics at every dinner party or debate philosophy over coffee. It's more subtle than that. They crave conversations where ideas actually develop, where thoughts build on each other, where both people emerge slightly changed by the exchange. Let me give you a real-world example. Imagine two conversations at a cafe in Bristol. How was your weekend? Good, pretty relaxing. Watched some Netflix. You? Same, really. Did a bit of shopping. Nice. Well, back to work tomorrow. Yeah, unfortunately. See you around. I've been thinking about something. Do you ever wonder why we feel guilty about doing nothing? What do you mean? Like, if I spend a Sunday just thinking or reading, I feel like I should have been more productive. But being productive also doesn't feel satisfying. It's strange. That is strange. Maybe we've confused being busy with being alive. Exactly. Or maybe we're afraid of what we'd discover if we actually stopped. Notice the difference? The second conversation goes somewhere. It opens doors rather than closes them. It invites both people to think differently, to examine assumptions, to create meaning together. Carl Rogers emphasized that genuine therapeutic progress, and by extension, genuine human connection, happens in what he called moments of meeting. These are interactions where both people are fully present, authentic, and willing to engage with reality as it actually is, not as social convention says it should be. Intelligent people hunger for these moments. Not constantly, not in every interaction, but regularly enough to feel intellectually and emotionally nourished. And here's the problem: these moments are rare. Most conversations follow predictable patterns designed to maintain comfort and avoid conflict. People exchange information but don't explore ideas. They share opinions but don't examine them. They talk at each other rather than with each other. For someone whose mind naturally seeks patterns, connections, and deeper understanding, these surface exchanges feel like eating empty calories. You can consume them endlessly without ever feeling satisfied. This creates a difficult choice. You can either participate in surface-level interactions and feel chronically undernourished, or you can withdraw into solitude where at least your mind can engage with substance, through books, research, creative work, or deep thinking. Rogers noted that many of his most intellectually gifted clients chose the latter. Not because they were antisocial or superior, but because solitude with substance felt more nourishing than company without it. This is why intelligent people often have few close friends but invest deeply in those relationships. They're not collecting connections, they're seeking depth. One conversation that genuinely explores ideas can be more satisfying than a dozen pleasant but shallow interactions. But there's another dimension to this isolation that's even more challenging: the burden of seeing what others don't. The burden of seeing. Carl Rogers once worked with a young woman at the University of Edinburgh who described her experience of social interaction as watching a play where everyone else has read the script but thinks they're improvising. She could see the patterns, the social performances, the unexamined assumptions, the contradictions people didn't notice in their own beliefs. This ability to see patterns and inconsistencies is characteristic of high intelligence. But Rogers identified something crucial: seeing more isn't always better. Sometimes it's isolating. Let's explore what this actually looks like in everyday life. You're at a family gathering in the Cotswolds. Someone makes a confident statement about politics or economics or social issues, something they've heard repeated so often they've accepted it as obvious truth. But you immediately recognize the logical flaws, the missing context, the contradictory assumptions embedded in their position. Now you face a choice. Do you point out these inconsistencies? If you do, you risk being seen as argumentative, condescending, or overthinking things. Do you stay silent? Then you're complicit in what you see as flawed reasoning, and you fail to be authentic, the very thing Rogers said was essential for genuine connection. This is what Rogers called the curse of consciousness. The more clearly you see reality, the more you notice how much of social interaction is built on comfortable illusions, oversimplifications, and unexamined beliefs. Here's a concrete example. Imagine a conversation about work-life balance. Most people comfortably hold these simultaneous beliefs: success requires hard work and dedication, and you should never sacrifice personal time for work. An intelligent person immediately notices the tension. These goals often contradict each other in practice. But pointing this out doesn't make you popular. It makes you exhausting. People don't want their comfortable contradictions examined. They want validation, not analysis. Rogers observed that intelligent people often learn to stay quiet, to let obvious contradictions pass unchallenged, to nod along with reasoning they can see is flawed. But this silence comes at a cost. It's a betrayal of their authentic self, the very incongruence Rogers warned created psychological distress. There's another dimension to this burden: seeing potential problems before they materialize. Intelligent minds excel at extrapolating consequences, identifying risks, and recognizing patterns that predict future outcomes. At a business meeting in London, while others are excited about a new strategy, you've already run through several scenarios in your mind and identified potential failure points. Do you voice these concerns and risk being labeled negative? Or do you stay silent and watch the predictable problems unfold? Either choice creates isolation. Speak up, and you're the pessimist who kills enthusiasm. Stay silent, and you're alone with knowledge others don't see or don't want to see. Rogers noted that this pattern, seeing more, processing deeper, recognizing complexities others miss, creates what he called existential loneliness. It's not loneliness from lack of people. It's loneliness from occupying a different perceptual reality than those around you. Imagine standing in a room where everyone else sees in black and white, but you see in color. You're experiencing the same space, but your experience is fundamentally different. How do you share what you're seeing? How do you connect over perceptions others can't access? This is why intelligent people often gravitate toward solitude. Not because they dislike humanity, but because being alone is sometimes easier than constantly managing the gap between what you see and what others are comfortable acknowledging. And this brings us to perhaps the most challenging aspect, the incompatibility of cognitive speeds. Different cognitive speeds. Carl Rogers once described working with a mathematics professor from Oxford who complained that conversations felt like waiting for a web page to load on dial-up internet. It wasn't arrogance, it was a genuine description of his experience. His mind processed information so quickly that normal conversational pace felt frustratingly slow. This is one of the most socially awkward truths about intelligence. People literally think at different speeds. And this difference in cognitive processing creates invisible barriers to connection. Let me paint a picture of how this works in practice. You're in a meeting discussing a problem. Someone begins explaining their proposed solution. Within the first 2 sentences, you've understood their approach, identified its strengths and limitations, considered 3 alternatives, and evaluated the likely outcomes of each. Meanwhile, they're still explaining the basic premise. Now you're in an uncomfortable position. Do you interrupt to advance the conversation to the next logical stage? That makes you seem impatient. Do you wait quietly while they finish explaining something you've already fully processed? That feels like wasting time and creates the appearance of disengagement. Rogers identified this as a fundamental timing mismatch in communication. He noted that highly intelligent people often report feeling like they're waiting during most conversations, waiting for others to reach conclusions they've already drawn, waiting through explanations of concepts they've already grasped, waiting for discussions to arrive at the logical destination they saw immediately. This isn't about being smarter or better. It's simply about cognitive processing speed. And the social cost of this speed difference is significant. Consider a typical evening at a pub in Manchester. The conversation naturally flows at a pace comfortable for most participants. But for someone processing significantly faster, the experience becomes tedious. Not because the people are uninteresting, but because the cognitive rhythm is mismatched. Here's what makes this particularly isolating: you can't really explain this experience without sounding arrogant. If you say, "I process information faster than most people," it sounds like a claim of superiority, even though it's simply a description of cognitive difference, like saying you're taller than average or left-handed. Rogers observed that this creates a double bind. Intelligent people either slow themselves down to match conversational pace, which feels cognitively constraining and exhausting, or they operate at their natural speed and risk alienating others who feel rushed or talked down to. There's also what Rogers called the frustration of interrupted thoughts. Highly intelligent people often think in complex chains. Idea A connects to idea B, which raises question C, which relates back to concept D from earlier. They're building elaborate mental structures in real time. But normal conversation requires turn-taking, social acknowledgement, and shared pace. So the chain gets interrupted. Someone changes the subject. Someone misunderstands and takes the conversation in a different direction. Someone needs clarification on a point you've already moved past. Each interruption requires mental effort to store the unfinished thought, address the immediate conversational need, and then try to return to where you were, except by then the conversation has moved on entirely. Imagine trying to compose a symphony while someone keeps pausing the orchestra every few measures to ask about the instruments. The music loses flow, coherence, and ultimately, meaning. This is why many intelligent people prefer written communication or solitary work. Writing lets them complete thought chains without interruption. Solitary work lets them operate at their natural cognitive speed without constant adjustment. Rogers emphasized that this preference isn't antisocial, it's adaptive. It's choosing environments where your cognitive style can function naturally rather than constantly constraining yourself to match others' processing speeds. But here's the painful part: this adaptation towards solitude reinforces isolation. The more you choose environments that match your cognitive speed, the less practice you have operating in mixed-speed social contexts. The gap widens, and connection becomes increasingly difficult. Yet there's another dimension we haven't explored, one that Rogers considered particularly important: the search for authenticity in a world of performance. Authenticity in a world of performance. There's a moment Carl Rogers described that changed how he understood human connection. He was working with a client who suddenly stopped mid-sentence and said, "I just realized I don't know how to have a real conversation. I only know how to perform conversations." This revelation sits at the heart of why intelligent people often choose solitude. They've developed a keen eye for authenticity, and they've realized how much of social life is performance. Walk through any British city centre on a Friday evening. Watch people interact outside the pubs and restaurants. Rogers would observe that much of what you're witnessing isn't genuine exchange, it's social theatre. People performing friendship, performing interest, performing connection. This isn't meant cynically. These performances serve important social functions. They maintain group cohesion, signal belonging, and create comfortable predictability. But for someone highly attuned to authenticity, someone who can spot the difference between genuine interest and polite nodding, these performances feel hollow. Rogers built his entire therapeutic approach on the concept of congruence, the alignment between inner experience and outer expression. He believed that psychological health required being able to be genuinely yourself in relationships. But here's the problem: society doesn't actually reward genuine authenticity most of the time. It rewards appropriate performance. Imagine you're at a professional event in the City of London. Someone asks how you're doing. The authentic answer might be, "Honestly, I'm struggling with existential questions about whether my work matters, and I'm not sure how to reconcile my need for financial security with my desire for meaningful contribution." But the socially appropriate answer is, "Good, thanks. Busy, you know how it is. How about you?" The authentic answer creates discomfort and violates social scripts. The performance maintains smooth interaction but leaves you disconnected from your actual inner experience. Intelligent people notice this gap constantly. They see people asking questions they don't want answered honestly. They watch conversations where everyone performs interest in topics nobody actually cares about. They observe friends maintaining relationships based on habit rather than genuine connection. And once you see these patterns, it's hard to participate in them without feeling like you're betraying something essential in yourself. Rogers noted that his most intellectually acute clients often faced this dilemma: choose authentic solitude or performative connection. And many chose solitude, not because they valued isolation, but because being alone felt more honest than performing connection. There's a particular loneliness in being surrounded by people while feeling unable to be genuinely yourself. Rogers called this loneliness in company, perhaps the most painful form of isolation because it offers the illusion of connection while delivering the reality of separation. This is why intelligent people often have a small circle of truly close relationships rather than a large network of casual connections. They're seeking rare people with whom they can drop the performance, people who value authenticity over social smoothness, depth over comfort, real exchange over pleasant platitudes. These relationships, when found, become incredibly precious. They're oases of authenticity in a desert of performance. But they're also rare, which means most of life is spent either performing or being alone. So we've explored why intelligent people often find themselves alone. But the crucial question remains: what do we do with this understanding? Navigating intelligent solitude, integration and meaning. Carl Rogers ended many of his lectures with a challenge that's especially relevant to our discussion. He'd ask, now that you understand the psychological dynamics at play, how will you live with this knowledge? Because understanding why intelligent people tend toward solitude is only useful if it helps you navigate the reality more consciously and constructively. Let's be clear about what we've explored. We're not talking about social anxiety or depression; those are clinical conditions requiring different approaches. We're talking about a natural psychological tendency that emerges from how highly intelligent minds process the world, the exhaustion of constant translation, the hunger for substantive exchange, the burden of seeing patterns others miss, the mismatch in cognitive processing speeds, and the difficulty of being authentic in social environments built on performance. Rogers believed that the solution wasn't to change who you are or to force yourself into social patterns that feel unnatural. Instead, he advocated for what he called fully functioning living, accepting your authentic nature while finding ways to get your genuine needs met. So what does this look like practically? First, reframe solitude from negative to necessary. There's enormous cultural pressure suggesting that time alone means loneliness, that preferring solitary activities indicates something wrong with you. But Rogers would say that for highly intelligent people, solitude often isn't deprivation, it's restoration. Think of it like this: an introvert isn't broken because they need alone time to recharge. Similarly, an intelligent person isn't antisocial because they need solitary time to think without translation, to process at their natural speed, to engage with ideas at the depth they crave. The reframe is crucial. You're not withdrawing from people. You're creating space for your mind to function optimally. This isn't isolation, it's intelligent self-care. Second, seek quality over quantity in relationships. Rogers emphasized that one genuine connection is worth more than dozens of surface relationships. For intelligent people, this means being intentional about where you invest relational energy. Look for people who share your appetite for depth. They might be rare, but they exist, often in unexpected places. Philosophy reading groups, specialized professional communities, academic environments, even online forums dedicated to substantive discussion. The medium matters less than the depth. And crucially, when you find these people, invest in those relationships. Rogers noted that genuine connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires courage. Be willing to be known, not just understood. Third, develop bridges between your internal complexity and external communication. This doesn't mean dumbing yourself down. It means developing what Rogers called empathic communication, the ability to meet people where they are while remaining true to yourself. You can honor both your complex understanding and others' different processing styles. You can ask questions that gently deepen conversations rather than lecturing. You can share your thoughts in ways that invite exploration rather than shutting down exchange. This isn't performance, it's skillful adaptation. Like speaking clearly to someone learning your language, you're not hiding who you are, you're making yourself accessible. Fourth, create outlets for your full intellectual and creative expression. Rogers believed that psychological health requires expressing your authentic self somewhere. If most social interactions require translation and constraint, you need spaces where you can think and create without those limitations. This might be writing, research, creative projects, teaching, or any pursuit that lets your mind fully extend. These aren't escapes from reality, they are spaces where you can be fully real. A scientist at Cambridge might find that her research provides intellectual satisfaction her social life cannot. A writer in Edinburgh might discover that his work lets him explore complexities he can't voice in conversation. This isn't compensation, it's integration. Fifth, accept the paradox without bitterness. Here's perhaps Rogers' most challenging wisdom: you can understand why connection is difficult without becoming cynical about humanity. You can recognize that most people operate at different cognitive speeds without seeing them as less than. You can acknowledge that you're often alone without deciding you're superior or tragic. The paradox is real. Intelligence creates both advantage and isolation. You see more, which is valuable. You see more, which is lonely. Both are true. Neither negates the other. Rogers would say that accepting this paradox, really accepting it, not just intellectually understanding it, is a form of psychological maturity. You stop fighting against reality and start working skillfully within it. Finally, remember that understanding doesn't eliminate the need for courage. All of this psychological insight doesn't make connection easy. It just makes the difficulty comprehensible. You'll still need courage to be vulnerable. You'll still need effort to bridge cognitive differences. You'll still face the choice between authentic solitude and performative connection. But now you're choosing consciously rather than reacting unconsciously. You're navigating your reality with insight rather than confusion. And that makes all the difference. Rogers believed that the fully functioning person isn't someone who has eliminated psychological challenges, it's someone who faces them with awareness, acceptance, and authentic engagement. So we return to where we began, that quiet library in Oxford, the solitary figure by the window. Now we understand that solitude differently. Carl Rogers taught us that intelligent people aren't alone because they're broken or because they've failed at connection. They're often alone because their minds work in ways that create genuine friction with standard social interaction. The translation is exhausting. The hunger for substance goes unfed. The patterns they see others don't recognize. The cognitive speeds don't match. The authenticity they crave conflicts with the performance most social situations require. This isn't a problem to solve. It's a reality to navigate with wisdom, self-acceptance, and intentional choice. You don't have to force yourself into social patterns that drain you. You don't have to apologize for needing depth, for thinking at your natural speed, for seeing patterns others miss. But you also don't have to accept isolation as inevitable or wear your solitude as a badge of superiority. The path forward is more subtle, accepting your nature, seeking quality connections, creating spaces for your full expression, developing bridges to others, and approaching the whole paradox with the kind of honest, compassionate awareness that Rogers believed was essential for psychological well-being. Your intelligence isn't a curse that dooms you to loneliness. But it is a reality that shapes your relational needs in specific ways. Understanding those needs, and honoring them without apology, is how you move from suffering your solitude to inhabiting it consciously, and from there, to finding the rare but real connections that make being fully yourself, with another person, possible. Because that's what Rogers ultimately believed, genuine connection is possible. It's just rarer, deeper, and more demanding than most people realize. And for intelligent people, that truth isn't discouraging, it's clarifying. In our next exploration, we'll examine another paradox Rogers identified, why truly confident people rarely try to prove themselves, and what that reveals about authentic self-worth in a world obsessed with validation.